After being abandoned by her boyfriend, a pregnant mechanic saves a mysterious man from a burning car. But what seemed like a random act of kindness turns into a dangerous game of cat and mouse when she discovers dark family secrets that were meant to stay buried forever. As she helps him uncover the truth about his parents' death, they realize their connection runs deeper than either could have imagined, and the person responsible will stop at nothing to silence them both. Before we begin this thrilling story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Is anyone there? Please, somebody help him. Riley Turner's own voice surprised her as it echoed across the empty parking lot of Turner's Auto Repair. The morning sickness that had driven her to throw open the garage's side door moments earlier was instantly forgotten as she watched the silver Mercedes careen off the rain-slicked road, flip twice, and slam into the concrete barrier. She didn't remember running. Later, she would marvel at how her body had moved without conscious thought, one hand instinctively pressing against her still flat stomach as she sprinted across the cracked asphalt. The acrid smell of gasoline cut through the crisp morning air, mixing with the metallic tang of motor oil that perpetually clung to her clothes. "Hold on," she called out, though she doubted the unconscious driver could hear her. Smoke curled from beneath the crumpled hood, and Riley's years of experience told her they had minutes, maybe seconds, before the whole thing went up in flames. The driver's side door was crushed beyond recognition, but the passenger door gave way with a groan when she yanked it. Inside, a man in an expensive suit hung upside down, still strapped into his seat. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, but what caught Riley's attention was the strange sweet smell that didn't belong in a crash. Something medicinal, almost like chloroform. "Sir? Can you hear me?" Riley's fingers found his pulse, steady, thank God. She reached across him to release the seatbelt, bracing herself to take his weight. "I'm going to get you out of here." The seatbelt clicked and the man slumped against her. He was heavier than she expected, and for a moment, panic flared in her chest. At 12 weeks pregnant, she shouldn't be lifting anything this heavy. But the growing heat at her back and the unmistakable pop of electrical components beginning to fail left no time for second thoughts. "Come on," she grunted, hooking her arms under his and dragging him backward. His expensive leather shoes caught on the doorframe, and she had to twist awkwardly to free him. The movement sent a wave of nausea through her, morning sickness picking the worst possible moment to return. They were 15 feet from the car when the first flame licked out from under the hood. Riley pulled harder, her boots struggling for purchase on the wet pavement. 20 feet. 25. The man stirred slightly, a low moan escaping his lips. The explosion knocked them both forward. Riley managed to twist as they fell, taking the impact on her shoulder rather than her stomach. Heat washed over them as the Mercedes became a fireball, and she used her body to shield the stranger from flying debris. As the initial roar of the explosion faded, Riley became aware of three things simultaneously: the wail of approaching sirens, the throbbing pain in her shoulder, and the man's eyes flickering open. They were the clearest blue she'd ever seen, clouded with confusion and something else, fear. "You're safe," she said quickly, helping him sit up. "The ambulance is almost here." He gripped her arm with surprising strength. "The briefcase," he rasped. "Black briefcase in the trunk? Your car's kind of on fire right now," Riley said, trying to keep him still as he attempted to stand. "The briefcase is gone." The man's face went ash white, and not just from his injuries. "Then he's won," he whispered before his eyes rolled back and he slumped unconscious against her. Riley sat there in the rain, holding a stranger who probably cost more than her garage's annual income, while her morning sickness churned threateningly. The scent of burning rubber and gasoline mixed with the lingering sweet smell that had clung to his clothes. 2 months ago, her biggest worry had been how to keep the garage afloat after her ex left town. Now, as emergency vehicles screamed into the parking lot and she noticed a small red dot dancing across the unconscious man's chest, she realized that morning sickness was about to become the least of her problems. The red dot disappeared as quickly as it had come, but Riley's heart was hammering. She'd watched enough movies to know what a laser sight looked like. As paramedics rushed toward them, she found herself wondering what kind of man traveled with both a mysterious briefcase and people who wanted him dead. More importantly, what had she just gotten herself, and her unborn child, involved in? The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital cast harsh shadows across the waiting room's mint green walls. Riley shifted uncomfortably in the plastic chair, her shoulder throbbing where the paramedics had insisted on examining it. They'd been more concerned about her pregnancy than her bruises, but after confirming both she and the baby were fine, they'd left her alone with a stack of insurance forms and far too many questions. "Miss Turner?" She looked up to find a nurse in dark blue scrubs, her nameplate read Amy, holding a steaming cup of ginger tea. "I thought this might help with the nausea," Amy said quietly, glancing at Riley's hand resting protectively over her stomach. "The EMTs mentioned you're expecting." "Thank you," Riley managed a smile, accepting the cup. "How is he? The man from the crash?" Amy glanced over her shoulder before leaning closer. "Mr. Blackwood is stable, but something's off." His talk screen came back with, "There you are." A sharp voice cut through the quiet waiting room. A tall man in an impeccably tailored suit strode toward them, his leather shoes clicking against the linoleum. "I'm Richard Blackwood, Marcus's uncle and legal proxy. I need to speak with whoever was at the scene." Amy straightened, her face carefully neutral. "I should check on my patients." As the nurse hurried away, Riley found herself under the scrutiny of steel-gray eyes that seemed to be cataloging her every flaw, from her oil-stained work boots to her messy ponytail. "You pulled my nephew from the wreck?" It wasn't really a question. "Yes, sir." "The car exploded just after." "His belongings," Richard interrupted. "Did you see a briefcase? The phone? Anything he might have had with him?" Riley's instincts, already on high alert from the laser sight she'd spotted earlier, screamed danger. "Everything was destroyed in the explosion. I barely got him out in time." Richard's jaw tightened. "Unfortunate. Though I suppose we should be grateful you were there at all. Marcus has always been a reckless driver." "The crash wasn't his fault," Riley said, remembering the sweet smell. "Something was wrong. He was unconscious before." "Miss Turner." "Riley Turner." "Miss Turner?" Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "While we appreciate your heroics, I'm sure you have better things to do than sit in a hospital waiting room. I'll have my assistant arrange compensation for any expenses." "I don't want money," Riley interrupted, her morning sickness replaced by a growing anger. "I want to make sure he's okay. He was drugged, wasn't he?" "That's what the talk screen showed." Richard went very still. "I'm not sure what you think you know, but my nephew's medical information is private. Perhaps the pregnancy hormones are making you emotional." "Mr. Blackwood?" A doctor appeared, tablet in hand. "We need to discuss your nephew's test results." "Of course." Richard turned smoothly away from Riley. "Oh, and Miss Turner? A word of advice. It's best not to imagine conspiracies where none exist. Especially in your condition." Riley watched him follow the doctor down the hall, her hands clenched around the cooling tea. Through the window of the waiting room, she caught a glimpse of a black SUV with tinted windows parked directly beneath a no parking sign. Here, Amy had reappeared silently beside her. A folded piece of paper was pressed into Riley's hand. "Mr. Blackwood's preliminary talk screen. I'm probably going to get fired for this, but..." She hesitated. "I was there when they brought in his parents 3 years ago. Car accident just like this. Something's not right with that family." Riley unfolded the paper. Among the medical terminology she didn't understand, one word jumped out: midazolam. She'd seen enough crime shows to recognize it, a sedative often used to subdue victims. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Stay away from my nephew, Miss Turner. Some cars are better left unexamined." Riley deleted the message, but not before saving a screenshot. She remembered the laser sight, the briefcase Marcus had been so worried about, and now this threat. Her father had always told her that the best mechanics were the ones who could spot a problem before it became a catastrophe. Right now, every instinct she had was telling her that Marcus Blackwood's crash was just the beginning of a much bigger wreck. The night shift at St. Mary's was quieter, but Riley couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She'd spent the afternoon pretending to leave, only to slip back in through the emergency entrance when Richard's black SUV finally pulled away. Now, at just past midnight, she sat in the dimly lit hospital room, watching Marcus Blackwood's chest rise and fall with each breath. Her phone screen glowed in the darkness, another notification from her ex, Tom. He'd somehow tagged her in photos from 3 years ago, pictures she was certain she'd deleted. Below them, he'd written, "Remember the good times? We should talk about the baby." "That's not a happy face." Riley started at the hoarse voice. Marcus's blue eyes were open, clearer now than they'd been during his brief moments of consciousness earlier. "You're supposed to be resting," she said, putting her phone away. "You're supposed to be home," he countered, wincing as he tried to sit up. "Unless guardian angels work night shifts now? Your uncle made it clear I wasn't welcome during regular visiting hours." Riley helped adjust his pillows. I wanted to make sure you were actually okay, not just whatever version of okay he's telling everyone. Marcus's face darkened. Richard's been here? Very concerned about your belongings? Less concerned about the fact you were drugged. So that's what it was. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. I thought I tasted something strange in my coffee, but by then... He looked at her sharply. How do you know I was drugged? Riley pulled out the folded toxicology report. Let's just say not everyone here trusts your uncle. As Marcus read, Riley checked her phone again. Tom had posted another old photo, this one from inside her apartment. A chill ran down her spine. She didn't remember him taking that picture. Your ex? Marcus asked, noticing her expression. That obvious? You have the same look I get when thinking about Richard. He handed back the report. How far along are you? Riley instinctively touched her stomach. 12 weeks. Tom left when I told him. Took a job in Seattle, said he wasn't ready. She laughed bitterly. Now suddenly he's interested again. Men who leave don't deserve second chances, Marcus said quietly. My uncle taught me that, ironically enough. Right after he moved in to help following my parents' accident. The way he said accident made Riley think of Amy's words about his parents' crash. You don't think it was an accident? I know it wasn't. Marcus's voice dropped lower. Just like I know today wasn't an accident. But proving it? He glanced at the door. Riley, you should go. Forget about all this. You have someone else to think about now. That's exactly why I can't just walk away. Riley leaned forward. I saw the laser sight today. If your uncle's willing to hurt his own nephew? What laser sight? Marcus grabbed her hand, his heart monitor spiking. When? After the crash. Before the ambulance came. Marcus released her hand to run his fingers through his hair, a gesture of frustration that reminded her so much of her father that it hurt. The briefcase had proof. Documents, recordings, everything linking Richard to my parents' death and the money laundering through our family's charitable foundation. I was taking it to the FBI when... He trailed off looking lost. Riley's phone buzzed again. This time it was a direct message from Tom. Nice hospital. Better not be anything wrong with my kid. Her blood ran cold. How did he know where she was? Marcus must have seen her face pale. What is it? She showed him the message. I never told him which hospital. I haven't told him anything. Richard, Marcus said grimly. He must have had someone run a background check, found your ex. 2 birds, 1 stone. He gets information about you and creates another problem to distract you. He tried to sit up further, setting off a small cascade of beeping from his monitors. Riley, listen to me. In my apartment there's a backup drive. Hidden? The door opened, flooding the room with fluorescent light. A night nurse Riley didn't recognize stepped in, syringe in hand. Time for your pain medication, Mr. Blackwood? Marcus's face went rigid with fear. I declined pain medication. The nurse smiled, reaching for his 4-line. Doctor's orders? Riley didn't think. She just moved, knocking the syringe away. It shattered on the floor as the fake nurse's elbow caught her in the ribs, sending her stumbling backward. She grabbed the visitor's chair and swung it up just as the woman pulled something from her pocket that definitely wasn't medical equipment. The hospital room's emergency alarm began to blare. The ultrasound monitor's steady rhythm filled the small exam room. Riley lay on the medical bed, acutely aware of the empty chair beside her where Tom should have been. Instead, her phone rested there, silent despite the string of messages she'd sent him about the appointment. There's your baby, Dr. Patterson pointed to the grainy image. Strong heartbeat, good size for 14 weeks. Riley blinked back unexpected tears. Everything's okay? Even with the accident at the garage? Perfect. The doctor's smile was reassuring. Though I'd recommend avoiding any more heroic car rescues for the next 6 months. If only she knew. Riley's phone buzzed. Not a message from Tom but from Amy. He's asking for you. Urgent. 20 minutes later, Riley slipped into Marcus's hospital room, ultrasound photos tucked safely in her jacket pocket. He looked better today, some of the bruising around his face beginning to fade. How did it go? He asked immediately. Riley paused in the act of closing the door. How did you? Amy told me where you were. He shifted uncomfortably. I'm sorry you had to do that alone. I'm getting used to it. Riley settled into the visitor's chair. Your uncle's men are still watching the entrance, by the way. But they're getting sloppier, playing cards in their car instead of actually surveilling. That's Richard's way, Marcus's voice hardened. Get comfortable, get careless, then strike. It's how he got to my parents. He glanced at the door before continuing more quietly. Riley, I haven't been entirely honest about what was in that briefcase. The one that burned in the crash? Marcus nodded. It wasn't just documents. There was a flash drive, evidence I've been collecting for years. Financial records, emails, recorded conversations. Everything linking Richard to my parents' death and his money laundering operation. But it burned with everything else. No. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. That was a decoy. The real drive is hidden in my apartment, somewhere Richard would never think to look. I need your help to get it. Riley's hand instinctively moved to her stomach. Marcus, I want to help, but I know I'm asking a lot. He reached for her hand, then seemed to think better of it. But Riley, you're the only person I can trust. Richard's got his people everywhere, the hospital, the police, even my own security team. But he doesn't know you. Doesn't understand you. Because I'm just a mechanic? Because you're so much more than he could ever understand. Riley pulled out the ultrasound photos, staring at the tiny shape that was her child. My dad used to say that the most important tool in a mechanic's arsenal wasn't a wrench or a screwdriver. It was the ability to see how things connected. How one broken piece could affect the whole machine. She laid the photos on Marcus's bed. This isn't just about your parents anymore, is it? Or the foundation's money. If Richard's willing to kill his own nephew, he'll never stop, Marcus finished. Not until he's destroyed everyone who could expose him. He picked up one of the ultrasound photos, studying it intently. I understand if you need to walk away. Your baby has to come first. Riley thought about Tom's silence, about Richard's threats, about the laser sight she'd seen in the garage. Walking away wouldn't make her safer. It would just leave her alone when Richard eventually decided she knew too much. Tell me about this flash drive, she said finally. Where exactly is it hidden? Marcus's relief was visible. Remember how I said Richard would never think to look for it? It's because it's hidden in the one thing he thinks is worthless. My father's old Chevelle repair manual. Riley's head snapped up. The 72 Chevelle? Your father was restoring one? You know the model? Know it? My dad. Riley's voice caught. My dad was helping someone restore one before he got sick. He used to talk about it all the time, said it was his favorite project because the owner actually understood what it meant to bring something back to life. Marcus went very still. Your father was John Turner? You knew him? He was... Marcus swallowed hard. He was my father's best friend. The only person he trusted besides my mother. His hands clenched the hospital blanket. Riley, I think our fathers were working together, trying to expose Richard. Riley's mind raced. The timing of her father's sudden illness, the way Richard's men had been watching her even before the crash. The drive, she said urgently. What's on it? Everything. Including? Marcus hesitated. Including some files my father labeled John's insurance? I never knew what they meant. Riley stood, decision made. Text me your apartment's address and exactly where to find the manual. And Marcus? She squeezed his hand, surprising them both. Our fathers tried to stop him together. Maybe that's why we found each other. As she left the hospital, Riley's phone finally lit up with a message from Tom. We need to talk about the baby. Meet me tonight? She deleted it without responding. She had more important connections to focus on now, not just to Marcus, but to whatever truth their fathers had died trying to protect. The ultrasound photos felt heavy in her pocket, a reminder of everything at stake. But for the first time since seeing that laser sight in her garage, Riley felt something else too. Oh. The service elevator's control panel came off easier than Riley expected. Marcus's building might look luxury from the outside, but the maintenance infrastructure told a different story. Frayed wires and outdated circuits. Exactly what she'd hoped to find. Just like hot wiring a '67 Mustang, she muttered, carefully crossing two wires. The elevator hummed to life, bypassing the need for a service key. As she replaced the panel, her father's voice echoed in her memory, the best mechanics don't just fix engines, sweetheart. They understand how things work, and how they can work better. The elevator creaked its way up to the penthouse level. Riley's hands trembled slightly as she checked her phone's clock. 3:47 a.m. Richard's men had maintained their routine of checking Marcus's apartment at 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. She had just over 2 hours. The service entrance lock was another matter entirely, electronic with a keypad. But electronics were just puzzles waiting to be solved. Riley pulled out the UV powder she used to check for oil leaks, dusting it over the keypad. 4 numbers glowed brighter than the others, their coating worn down by repeated use. 1-9-8-4, she whispered, remembering Marcus mentioning it was the year his parents met. The lock clicked open. Inside, Marcus's apartment felt frozen in time. Half-empty coffee cup on the counter, Wall Street Journal spread open, reading glasses perched on top, all exactly as he'd left them the morning of the crash. Riley moved carefully, conscious of every sound in the too quiet space. Hidden in plain sight, Marcus had said. Look for the one thing Richard would never touch. Her eyes swept the modern art and expensive furniture until they landed on a shelf of photography books. Among the glossy hardcovers about exotic locations sat a worn repair manual for a '72 Chevelle. Exactly the model Marcus's father had been restoring when he died. The flash drive was wedged inside the hollow spine, exactly where Marcus said it would be. Riley's hands shook as she reached for it. Voices in the hallway. Keys jingling. Riley's heart stopped. The front door handle began to turn. She dove into the nearest closet, pulling the door closed just as heavy footsteps entered the apartment. Through the slats, she could make out two men in dark suits, the same ones she'd seen watching the hospital. Check everything, a gruff voice ordered. Boss wants any drives, phones, papers, anything that could have data on it. What about the girl? A second voice asked. The mechanic? Being handled. Her ex-boyfriend's keeping tabs until we figure out what she knows. Riley pressed her hand against her mouth to quiet her breathing. The flash drive felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket. Found something, the second voice called from Marcus's office. Looks like he was collecting bank statements from the foundation. Bag it. Anything else? Nothing obvious. Should we plant the evidence? Yeah. Boss wants this wrapped up clean. Once we take care of Marcus at the hospital tomorrow night, everything needs to point to him embezzling from the foundation. Suicide looks neater than murder. Riley's blood ran cold. Her elbow brushed a hanging coat, making the hanger scrape softly against the rod. The footsteps stopped. You hear that? Riley held her breath, one hand instinctively covering her stomach. The closet door was thin, too thin. If they opened it, a phone rang, startling everyone. Yeah, boss, the gruff voice answered. Pause. No, nothing yet. But, another pause. Now. But we haven't finished, he sighed. Yes, sir. Right away. More footsteps rushed this time. Boss wants us at the hospital. Something about Marcus's condition changing? What about the sweep? No time. We'll come back before the morning check. The front door closed. Riley counted to 100 before letting herself breathe. Her legs shook as she pushed the closet door open, but her mind was racing with mechanical precision. She had to warn Marcus, had to get him out before. A floorboard creaked behind her. Miss Turner, Richard Blackwood's voice was silk over steel. I had a feeling you might try something like this. Riley turned slowly. Richard stood in the apartment's entrance, silhouetted against the hallway light. In his hand was a small device that looked disturbingly like the garage's remote starter. I pressed the button when they left, he said conversationally. Didn't want to spook my men, they tend to be a bit overzealous. But now we can have a proper chat about that flash drive in your pocket. Riley's mind raced. The service elevator was too far. The front door was blocked. But she was standing next to the one thing she understood better than anyone else in the room, a mechanical system. She smiled, channeling every ounce of fear into determination. You know what your nephew told me about you, Richard? He raised an eyebrow. Do tell? That you never got your hands dirty. Never learned how things really work. She took a step back, closer to the ventilation grate. Like how old buildings use centralized AC systems. Or how sound carries through ductwork. Understanding dawned on Richard's face a second too late. Riley ripped the grate from the wall and screamed, her voice echoing through the building's ventilation system like a banshee. Almost instantly, lights began flicking on in neighboring apartments. Richard lunged forward, but Riley was already moving. She slammed her shoulder into him, the same one she'd injured in the crash, sending them both stumbling. Pain exploded through her arm, but she kept going out the door and into the now awakening hallway. Behind her, she could hear Richard cursing, but he couldn't risk being seen. Not with his carefully crafted reputation. Riley ran for the main elevator, the flash drive secure in her pocket and her father's words ringing in her ears. Sometimes the best escape route isn't about speed, it's about understanding the machine. The closed sign on Jack's Auto Parts didn't stop Riley from pounding on the back door. Rain pelted her face as she glanced over her shoulder, scanning for the black SUV she'd spotted 2 blocks back. Jack. It's Riley, I need help. The door cracked open, revealing a tall man in his 50s, gray hair pulled back in a ponytail. Jack Miller had been her father's best friend and her unofficial uncle since before she could walk. Riley? It's 4 in the morning, what? His eyes widened at her appearance, soaking wet, clutching her shoulder, clearly terrified. Inside. Now. She slipped past him into the familiar embrace of motor oil and rubber that permeated the store's back room. Jack locked the door, then immediately started pulling down the security shutters on all the windows. You want to tell me why you look like you've seen a ghost? He asked, leading her toward his office. Because people who were supposed to be dead aren't, and people who are alive might not be for long if I don't. Riley's voice cracked. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her hands shaking. I need your computer. Please. Jack took one look at her face and nodded, pulling his ancient desktop keyboard toward her. Want to tell me who's trying to kill you? Richard Blackwood. Jack went very still. Blackwood? As in Blackwood Foundation? The biggest charitable donor in the state? The very same. Riley plugged in the flash drive with trembling fingers. He killed Marcus's parents and now he's trying to kill Marcus and I. She broke off as files began populating the screen. Spreadsheets, emails, audio files, and photographs, so many photographs. Marcus's parents at various foundation events, always with Richard lurking in the background. Bank statements showing massive transfers to offshore accounts, disguised as charitable donations. A chemical analysis of the brake fluid from the car crash that killed Marcus's parents, showing it had been deliberately contaminated. My God, Jack whispered, leaning over her shoulder. This is everything, Riley finished, opening another file. The foundation was just a front. Richard's been using it to launder money for years. When Marcus's parents figured it out, an audio file began to play, capturing a conversation between Richard and someone named Davidson. The accident is arranged. Once James and Emma are gone, Marcus will inherit everything. I'm already his legal guardian. Within a year, the foundation's assets will be completely under our control. A car engine growled past the store, moving slowly. Riley and Jack both froze. Back room, Jack said quietly. There's a trap door under the carpet from when this place was a speakeasy. Your dad and I used to hide our best parts there during the recession. Riley gathered the files they'd printed, but left the flash drive copying. As Jack rolled back the carpet, headlights swept across the front of the store. Riley, Jack grabbed her arm before she descended. Your dad helped Marcus's father restore that Chevelle. Did you know that? She shook her head. James Blackwood was a good man. Paid up front, treated everyone with respect. When your dad got sick, James covered his medical bills through the foundation. Richard fought it, but James insisted. Jack's eyes hardened. Whatever you need to make this right, I'm in. The trap door closed above her just as the store's front door rattled. Riley heard Jack moving toward it, heard him calling out, We're closed. Can't you read the sign? Muffled voices. Questions about a pregnant woman. Jack's gruff denials. In the darkness of the hidden room, Riley's phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. Smart girl running to Jack's. But Marcus isn't as safe as you think. Tick-tock. Her hand pressed against her stomach as she looked at the evidence scattered around her. Her father had taught her that every machine had a breaking point, a spot where enough pressure would cause the whole system to fail. Looking at the documents, at the years of careful fraud and calculated murder, Riley realized she might have just found Richard Blackwood's. Above her, the bell over the store's door chimed as Richard's men finally gave up and left. But Riley barely heard it. She was too busy staring at a photo from deep in the files, her father, James Blackwood, and a teenage Marcus, all grinning over the open hood of that Chevelle. Some connections, it seemed, ran deeper than anyone knew. It's perfect, Riley muttered, examining the garage's ancient security system. Because it's so outdated, they won't even think to check for it. Jack peered at the mess of wires she'd exposed behind the control panel. You sure about this? Richard Blackwood isn't some kid trying to steal hubcaps. That's exactly why it'll work. Riley connected her laptop to the system. Rich people always underestimate old technology. Dad taught me that when we'd restore vintage cars, everyone assumes newer is better. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, programming the cameras to record to multiple locations simultaneously. The system backs up to both the cloud and a local hard drive. Even if they find one, they won't expect the other. Her phone buzzed, a text from Marcus, sent from the burner phone she'd smuggled into his room inside a crossword puzzle book. Nurse changed shift. Moving now. Riley checked the time, 2:17 a.m. The hospital's skeleton crew would be doing rounds, creating the perfect cover for Marcus's escape. If everything went according to plan, he'd meet her here in less than an hour. If everything went according to plan. Marcus waited until the footsteps faded before carefully removing his four. Every movement sent pain shooting through his ribs, but adrenaline was a powerful motivator. Riley's last message had been clear. Richard planned to take care of him tomorrow night. There wouldn't be another chance. The phone she'd smuggled him was a blessing, not just for communication, but for what else she'd hidden inside its case. A small electronic keycard duplicator. All he had to do was get close enough to one of his guards to clone their access card. He didn't have to wait long. "Just checking in, Mr. Blackwood," the night guard said, poking his head in. "Perfect, the same one who always dozed off around 2 a.m. "Actually," Marcus coughed weakly, "could you help me get to the bathroom? Everything's still a bit dizzy." The guard hesitated, then stepped forward. As he helped Marcus stand, the duplicator in Marcus's pocket silently copied the data from the guard's badge. One obstacle down. A dozen more to go. "Cameras are set," Riley announced, checking the feeds on her laptop. "Motion sensors active, audio recording enabled." She turned to Jack. "You should go. If this goes wrong." "If you're staying, I'm staying," Jack said firmly. "Your father would haunt me if I left you alone." Riley swallowed hard. "Richard's smart. He won't just walk in here and confess." "No," Jack agreed, "but pride makes people stupid. And from what you've shown me, Richard Blackwood has pride in spades." Her phone lit up again. "Third floor clear. Moving to stairwell?" Riley sent back a quick "be careful" before returning to her preparations. The garage's layout was her advantage. She knew every corner, every shadow, every quirk of its ancient infrastructure. Richard would be walking into her territory. She just hoped Marcus would make it in time. The service stairwell was supposed to be empty. Marcus froze as voices echoed from below, accompanied by footsteps coming up. He was trapped between floors, his stolen key card useless against human eyes. What would Riley do? His gaze landed on the stairwell's fire hose cabinet. Without hesitation, he yanked it open and squeezed inside, pulling the door nearly shut. Through the crack, he watched two orderlies pass by, discussing their dinner plans. Once they were gone, he allowed himself a shaky breath. Riley's influence was already showing, looking for mechanical solutions instead of just trying to overpower problems. He checked the burner phone, 2:34 a.m. She'd be preparing the garage now, setting her trap. He just had to make it there. "Movement at the south entrance," Jack whispered. Riley nodded, watching her laptop screen. Two men in dark suits, Richard's typical muscle, were circling the building. Right on schedule. "Remember," she said quietly, "no matter what happens, wait for my signal." Her phone vibrated. Ground floor. 5 minutes? Riley took a deep breath and opened her messaging app. Time to bait the trap. To Richard Blackwood, "We need to talk. I have the flash drive, but there's something you should see first. Come alone to Turner's Auto Repair. Your men can watch the exits, but if you want what I found in your nephew's apartment, this has to be between us." The response came quickly. "You're either very brave or very stupid, Miss Turner. Maybe I just know something you don't." 3 dots appeared as Richard typed. Then, 20 minutes. "For your sake, this better be worth my time." Riley closed her laptop and moved it to its hiding spot. Everything was in place. Cameras running, exits mapped, backup plans ready. She'd learned from her father that the key to fixing any machine was understanding not just how it worked, but how it could break. Tonight she was going to break Richard Blackwood. Marcus reached the hospital's service entrance just as an ambulance pulled in, its lights flooding the area. He pressed himself against the wall, heart pounding. 20 feet to the street. 10 to the ambulance bay. Guards at both. The paramedics rushed past with a patient, creating a moment of chaos. Marcus didn't hesitate. He walked confidently toward the ambulance bay, swiped his stolen card at the reader, and stepped into the night as if he belonged there. Nobody stopped him. Nobody even looked twice at another person in hospital scrubs. His ribs screamed with every step, but he kept moving. Riley was waiting. And if he knew his uncle, and he did, she was going to need all the help she could get. He just prayed he'd make it in time. The garage's overhead lights buzzed faintly as Riley leaned against her father's old workbench. Her hand instinctively rested on her stomach, a gesture that was becoming more frequent as the danger increased. The flash drive sat prominently on the bench beside her, its small LED blinking steadily. Right on cue, the front door opened. "I must admit," Richard Blackwood said, stepping into the fluorescent light, "I'm curious what you think you've found that's worth risking everything for." His expensive shoes clicked against the concrete floor as he approached. "Though I suppose desperate times call for desperate measures. How far along are you now?" 12 weeks. Riley kept her voice steady. 14. But we're not here to discuss my pregnancy, aren't we? Richard's smile was cold. A single mother running a failing garage, about to bring a child into this world without any support. I could change that, you know. One phone call and you'd never have to worry about money again. Like you helped Marcus's parents? I saw the foundation's records of their charitable donations. Something flickered in Richard's eyes, surprise quickly masked. Ah, so you did find something interesting on that drive. Though I doubt you understand the complexities of high-level financial management, I understand engines, Riley said. And I understand that when something's running wrong, you follow the flow until you find the leak. She picked up a thick manila envelope. Like these transfer records. Money flowing from the foundation to offshore accounts, then back through shell companies you control. James and Emma figured it out, didn't they? That's why they had to die. Richard's pleasant mask slipped slightly. You sound just like them, so concerned with their precious moral high ground. Do you know what their principles got them? A tragic accident on a dark road. You mean sabotaged brake lines and a sedated driver? Prove it? Richard stepped closer, looming over her. Oh wait, you can't. Because like every other piece of evidence against me, it disappeared in the crash. Just like Marcus's little briefcase burned up so conveniently. Riley's heart pounded, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. Your own brother, Richard. You killed your own brother. Half-brother, Richard snarled, mask finally cracking. The precious legitimate heir, handed everything while I had to claw my way up from nothing. Do you know what it's like watching someone else be given everything you deserve? James was weak. He would have destroyed our father's legacy with his charitable impulses and ethical concerns. So you destroyed him instead. I saved this family's legacy. The foundation now helps more people than ever, even if they don't know exactly how their donations are being processed. He glanced at the flash drive. Though I must thank you for returning this. Tidying up loose ends can be so tedious. I made copies. Of course you did. Just like I'm sure you have cameras recording right now, hoping to catch a confession? Richard smiled again, reaching into his pocket. Unfortunately, high-frequency electromagnetic pulses tend to play havoc with electronic devices. Riley's blood ran cold as he pulled out a small device. Every screen in the garage went dark. No backup drives, no recordings, no evidence. Richard's voice hardened. Now where are the copies? Go to hell. The first blow caught her off guard. Not a punch, but a backhanded strike that sent her stumbling backward into the workbench. Tools clattered to the floor. I've spent 20 years building this empire, Richard advanced on her. I won't let some pregnant mechanic destroy everything. Riley's hand found a wrench behind her back. You really should have learned more about mechanics. She swung the wrench, not at Richard but at the hydraulic lift control beside him. The platform overhead released with a grinding shriek, dropping the suspended car frame toward Richard. He dove sideways, crashing into a stack of oil drums. Riley ran, but her pregnant body couldn't move as fast as usual. Richard's hand caught her ankle, sending her sprawling. She managed to twist as she fell, taking the impact on her side rather than her stomach, but pain still shot through her abdomen. I tried to be reasonable. Richard pulled her backward across the floor. Offered you a way out. But you're just like James, too stubborn to know when to fold. Riley kicked out, catching him in the knee. He stumbled but didn't let go. Her free hand scrabbled against the floor, searching for anything. Her fingers closed around a spark plug. You want to know something funny? She gasped as Richard dragged her up by her shirt. You were right about the cameras. But wrong about what kind? She smashed the spark plug against the floor. Its ceramic shattered, and suddenly the garage was filled with the whir of ancient mechanical security cameras. The kind that ran on simple motors, not digital signals. Richard's eyes widened as he realized his mistake. In the distance, sirens wailed. My father taught me something about old machines, Riley said, tasting blood from her split lip. Sometimes the simplest technology is the hardest to break. Richard's face contorted with rage. His hand shot out, closing around her throat. Then I'll have to break you instead. The garage door exploded inward with a crash of splintering wood. Marcus stood in the entrance, Jack and several police officers behind him. Get away from her, Marcus's voice was deadly quiet. Richard spun Riley around, using her as a shield. His arm pressed against her throat. This is touching, nephew. But you're too late. Just like you were too late to save your parents. Actually, Riley wheezed, he's right on time. She stomped down hard on Richard's instep, simultaneously driving her elbow back into his solar plexus. As his grip loosened, she ducked away. The police swarmed in, but Richard had one last card to play. His hand darted into his jacket, emerging with a glint of metal. 3 shots rang out in rapid succession. Riley felt Marcus tackle her to the ground, shielding her body with his. Her hands clutched her stomach, terrified of what the fall might have done. When she looked up, Richard Blackwood was on his knees, surrounded by officers, his own weapon unfired on the floor beside him. "Riley?" Marcus's voice was frantic. "The baby?" She pressed a hand to her abdomen, feeling a strong kick in response. "We're okay. We're both okay." As the officers led Richard away, she heard him mutter, "You're just a mechanic." "How did you?" "That's exactly why I won," Riley cut him off. "Because you thought being a mechanic made me simple. But my father taught me that understanding machines means understanding systems. And your system just broke down." The police station's interview room felt too small for the weight of everything that had happened. Riley sat beside Marcus, an ice pack pressed against her ribs, while Detective Sarah Morrison replayed the mechanical camera footage for the 3rd time. Richard's voice crackled through the speakers. "I saved this family's legacy. James was weak. Had to claw my way up from nothing." "The confession's clear," Morrison said, stopping the playback. "Combined with the financial records and Miss Turner's testimony, we have enough to put him away for a long time." Marcus squeezed Riley's hand. "Then it's over?" A knock interrupted them. Officer Chin stepped in, his face tense. "Detective, we have a situation. The prosecutor's here." Morrison frowned. "At midnight? I didn't call." Richard Blackwood did, a smooth voice said as a woman in an expensive suit entered. "I'm Margaret Wells, representing the district attorney's office. And I'm afraid we have a problem with your evidence." Riley felt Marcus stiffen beside her. "What kind of problem?" Wells placed a thick folder on the table. "Mr. Blackwood has provided documentation showing that all foundation transactions were approved by an independent board. Furthermore, we have sworn statements from multiple witnesses placing him in New York during his brother's accident." "That's impossible." Riley started to stand, but her bruised ribs protested. "The records on the flash drive were obtained illegally," Wells cut her off. "Breaking and entering, theft of private property, not to mention the questionable methods used to record his alleged confession." Morrison's jaw clenched. "The garage cameras were legally installed security devices. In a place of business that was closed, recording without consent?" Wells smiled thinly. "Additionally, Mr. Blackwood has filed assault charges against Miss Turner. Given her condition, we're willing to be lenient, but—" "You've got to be kidding me," Marcus exploded. "He tried to kill her. After she lured him to her garage under false pretenses and dropped a car on him." Wells spread her hands. "Mr. Blackwood has generously offered to drop all charges, including those against Dr. Amy Chin for stealing medical records. If you agree to do the same." Riley's blood ran cold. "Amy." She'd forgotten about the nurse who'd helped them. "He's going to walk," she whispered. "After everything, he's going to—" Her phone buzzed. An email from Jack. "Don't give up. Check your father's old files. Now." Riley pulled out her phone, fingers shaking as she opened the attached scan. It was a letter, dated just weeks before her father's death. Her gasp made everyone turn. "What is it?" Marcus asked. "A confession," Riley's voice shook. "From your father to mine." He knew Richard was targeting him. Dad was helping him gather evidence, hiding copies in the Chevelle they were restoring. She looked up at Marcus. "The car's still in my garage's storage unit. We never finished it after Dad got sick." Wells's smile faltered. Any evidence conveniently discovered now would be highly suspicious. "Except," Marcus said slowly, "the car's existence is documented. There are photos of my father and John Turner working on it in the Foundation's newsletters. Richard himself approved the restoration as a charitable project." Morrison leaned forward. "And the storage unit?" "Paid automatically through my father's estate," Riley said. "Richard never knew about it because it wasn't part of the garage proper." She turned to Wells. "Still want to talk about illegal evidence?" The prosecutor's phone chimed. She checked it and her professional mask cracked slightly. "Excuse me," she said stiffly. "I need to consult with my client." As she left, Riley's phone buzzed again. Another message from Jack. "Richard's banker just called. All his accounts are being frozen. Seems someone anonymously tipped off the FBI's financial crimes unit. Someone who knows a lot about processing international transactions?" "Tom," Riley breathed. At Marcus's questioning look, she explained, "My ex. He works in financial compliance. He must have, after everything Richard did to manipulate him." Morrison's radio crackled. "Detective, suspect Blackwood is requesting immunity in exchange for information about other parties involved in the money laundering scheme." "Now that," Morrison smiled, "sounds like checkmate." Marcus started to agree, but Riley grabbed his arm. "Wait, this is too easy. Richard never admits defeat, he always has." The lights went out. In the darkness, emergency alarms began to blare. Morrison's radio erupted with voices. "Multiple fires reported. Evidence room breached. Suspect Blackwood is." An explosion rocked the building. He had a backup plan, Riley realized. The whole time he was just keeping us distracted while... The Chevelle, Marcus's face went white. "The evidence. He's going to destroy it all." Riley was already moving, ignoring her protesting ribs. "The storage unit has a separate entrance. If we hurry..." Another explosion, closer this time. Through the window, they could see flames rising from the direction of Riley's garage. "You can't," Marcus caught her arm. "It's too dangerous." "The baby?" Riley met his eyes in the emergency light's red glow. "Your father and mine died trying to expose the truth. I won't let their sacrifice be for nothing." She pressed her keys into his hand. "But I need you to trust me." Like they trusted each other. For a moment, Marcus just stared at the keys. Then he straightened, decision made. "Together," he said. "We finish this together." Behind them, Morrison was barking orders into her radio. Sirens wailed in the distance. And somewhere in the chaos, Richard Blackwood was making his final play. But this time they were ready for him. "Easy does it," Riley called from beneath the Chevelle's hood. "Try it now." Marcus turned the key and the engine roared to life, a sound 30 years in the making. The restored car gleamed in the morning sunlight streaming through Turner and Blackwood Auto's newly installed skylights, its dark blue paint reflecting the bustle of the expanded garage. "Your father would be proud," Jack said, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "Both of them would." Riley straightened carefully, one hand resting on her now prominent belly. The baby kicked as if in agreement, making her smile. After everything that had happened 6 months ago, the fire, Richard's desperate attempt to destroy the evidence, and the final confrontation at the storage unit, moments like this felt like small miracles. The newspapers had called it the Blackwood Foundation scandal, running headlines about Richard's attempted murder of his nephew, the decades of money laundering, and his final desperate arson attempt. But they'd missed the real story, the one about two fathers who tried to expose the truth, and their children who finally finished what they'd started. "Found something else while cleaning out the trunk," Marcus said, pulling a worn leather satchel from the Chevelle. "More of my father's old papers." Riley joined him on the small couch they'd added to the garage's office area, their shoulders touching as he opened the satchel. Inside were bundles of letters, photographs, and... "Is that my dad?" Riley picked up a faded photo. A much younger John Turner stood beside James Blackwood, both men laughing as they worked on an engine. "There's more," Marcus said softly, unfolding a letter. "This is from my father to yours. Dear John. The work you've done on the Foundation's Youth Mechanics program has been incredible. These kids remind me of us back in college. 2 scholarship students too stubborn to admit we were in over our heads in that engineering class. If Emma hadn't tutored us both, I might never have graduated, let alone built this foundation. Which makes what I have to tell you even harder. I've discovered something about the Foundation's finances that keeps me up at night. Richard's involved in something dangerous. I have proof, but I need somewhere safe to store it until I can get everything in order. That old Chevelle we've been restoring, the one Richard thinks is a waste of time, might be perfect. There's something else you should know. Emma's been doing some digging into our family history and she found something remarkable. Do you remember telling me about your grandfather? The one who changed his name when he came to America? Emma found his original birth certificate. John, his name was William Blackwood. Riley's hands shook. What? Marcus kept reading. We're cousins, John. Distant ones, but blood all the same. Maybe that's why we always felt like brothers. I'm telling you this now because if anything happens to me, I need you to know the truth about everything. The Foundation belongs to our whole family, not just the branch Richard wants to claim. Keep an eye on Marcus for me. And that little girl of yours, Riley's getting more like you every day. Maybe someday they'll rebuild what Richard's trying to tear down. Your cousin James. Riley couldn't speak. Her father had known. Had been helping James gather evidence. And then both of them had died before they could expose the truth. They knew, she whispered finally. They knew what Richard might do, but they kept fighting anyway. Marcus took her hand. They protected us the only way they could. Left us the pieces to finish it. Through the office window, They could see the garage's main floor bustling with activity. 3 of their youth program students were learning engine repair from Jack, while Amy, who'd left nursing to handle their office management, scheduled appointments. The foundation's new board had approved their proposal to expand the mechanics training program nationwide. "I've been thinking," Marcus said, his hand moving to cover hers on her stomach. "About names for the baby." Riley smiled. "Let me guess, James for a boy?" Actually, he pulled out one more item from the satchel, a small velvet box. "I was thinking we should decide that together. As a family." The ring inside was simple, elegant, and perfectly her. Just like the question that came with it. "Richard tried to destroy our families," Marcus said softly. "But he didn't understand what really makes a legacy. It's not about money or power. It's about building something that helps others. Growing something stronger from broken pieces." He squeezed her hand. "What do you say we keep rebuilding together?" Riley looked around the garage, at the Chevelle that had hidden their father's secrets, at the business they'd built from the ashes of Richard's destruction, at the future growing inside her. In the end, it had never been just about exposing Richard's crimes. It was about honoring the connection between 2 families who'd chosen to stand up for what was right. "Together," she said, slipping the ring onto her finger. "Although you should know, I already picked names." She grinned at his raised eyebrow. "John James for a boy, Emma Rose for a girl." Marcus kissed her, and the baby kicked again as if casting a vote. Outside, a young student's voice rose excitedly as an engine turned over for the first time. Another small victory, another piece rebuilt. The work their fathers had started would continue, passed down to a new generation who would learn not just how to fix engines, but how to stand up for what was right. Some machines were built to break. But some bonds, forged in trust and tempered by sacrifice, only grew stronger when tested by fire. Riley touched the ring, then her belly, then reached for a wrench. There was always more to rebuild, more to restore, more to grow. And now they would do it together, as they were always meant to. What would you have done in Riley's position when she discovered her pregnancy wasn't the only life-changing surprise she'd face? Would you have helped Marcus expose the truth, knowing it could put you and your unborn child at risk? Share your thoughts in the comments below. When is doing the right thing worth risking everything? Some bonds are strengthened by fire, just like Riley and Marcus discovered. If this story of family, courage, and rebuilding touched your heart, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives that remind us what truly matters in life. Share your own stories of unexpected connections and courage in the comments below, because sometimes the strongest families are the ones we choose to build together. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our next moving story.